everyone. So I'm going to be talking about Metasploit, the Pentester Swiss Army knife. So for those who don't know, a pen tester is, well, pen tester is short for penetration tester. You might have heard terms like ethical hacker or white hat hacker. That's, they all mean the same thing. And essentially what these people do is they are hackers that are hired by businesses to try and find vulnerabilities in their systems before they get deployed, such that, they can report back to the businesses so the businesses can correct those vulnerabilities before they actually deploy or launch their product. And, when it's out there in the open, it's too late. People with real malicious intent can come and try and exploit vulnerabilities on your system. So just a little bit of background. You might have noticed that in the past 5 years, there's been a bit of an uptick in cybersecurity. Just in general, there's more people looking for cybersecurity jobs, and there's more cybersecurity jobs open as far as, in general. I'm going to talk about 3 main reasons for that. So the first one being that there's flurries of cyber attacks. Cyber attacks are surprisingly becoming increasingly more common, and they can seriously affect even very large businesses like Yahoo, for example. They suffered a cyber attack fairly recently. And it's in these businesses' best interests to secure their applications, because in these attacks, client information can be exposed and used for identity theft or sold to other people. Things such as emails and usernames and password hashes. It's really not a good thing if those are out there, out on the web. The second one being the COVID-19 pandemic. So with the lockdown, a lot of people started being sort of perpetually online and working from home. So there's 2 sides to this coin. Firstly, there's more potential victims, which does make the, cybercrime a little easier. There's people that are less experienced with computers, on their computer more often. And the other part is that a lot of people lost their jobs during the pandemic, and people did turn to more unethical means of making money in those trying times. The third point is that lately cybersecurity has become more appealing in the eyes of recent graduates. People have started considering cybersecurity as their main career pathway rather than software development, because of doomsayers and alarmists saying that, software development jobs are not going to exist in X years because of AI. Whether they're right or wrong, only time will tell. But it does seem like a more secure alternative for new graduates. So there's more people in general trying to get into that business space as pen testers. All right. So now, actually getting into the details of Metasploit. So for these pen testers, Metasploit is very useful. So as you can see here, Metasploit helps security teams do more than just verify vulnerabilities, manage security assessments, and improve security awareness. It empowers and arms defenders to always stay 1 step or 2 ahead of the game. And one of the main reasons for that is Metasploit, the Metasploit framework is actually open source. So there is a GitHub that you can attempt to make pull requests for. It's owned and run by a company called Rapid7. So the Rapid7 employees and some senior contributors to the GitHub will view all the pull requests and, add your changes if they're worthwhile. So this actually enables a large community of hackers to contribute to this project, where the hacking domain is so vast. So there's lots of people in different areas that can contribute to this project and make it a more robust, sort of diverse tool. So the Metasploit framework, in terms of its actual infrastructure, it's basically a collection of 6 main modules. And these are the modules shown here. There's auxiliary, encoder, evasion, exploit, payload, and post. And I'm going to talk about them in turn, right? So think of a module as, okay, the naming isn't great. So within modules, there's modules. And these are basically pieces of code that are ready and easily configurable for pen testers to use, day to day. It's very efficient. So the auxiliary module would contain code that is related to not necessarily the active exploitation of a vulnerability, but maybe something like a port scanner, like Nmap, other scanners for reconnaissance to actually see if a target system is vulnerable or has a particular vulnerability. That would be in the auxiliary module. And the exploit and payload modules, I'm going to talk about them together. Basically, the exploit module contains actual exploits, which are pieces of code that actively leverage vulnerabilities to gain access to a target machine. And these exploits usually carry a payload. And the payload is a piece of code that, once you've got access to the machine, will run on the target machine to perform some sort of malicious action. So if I had to give an example, a payload would be like a TCP reverse shell, which will create a connection from the target machine to the attacker machine, so the attacker can run commands directly on the target's machine. The encoder module is a module that contains code that, it encodes your payload, but the purpose of encoding your payload is that there's two main reasons. One of them, some data can get jumbled and messed up along the way, so it helps with null bytes. And the second one being that you can encode your payloads to bypass certain security measures. So antiviruses, like a simple signature scanning antivirus, perhaps you could take your payload and then encode it in a certain way to make it unrecognizable in the eyes of that antivirus. The evasion module is basically the encoder module and payload module sort of baked together. So usually you'd get a payload and encode it. The evasion module does that, but it also has more complex modules that perform more complex encoding options. So an example would be a module in evasion that would take your payload and make it more likely to bypass Windows Defender. And the post module contains code that you would typically run after you've exploited the vulnerability, after you've run your payload, to perform additional tasks, like maybe you want to dump password hashes somewhere, maybe you want to scan the users on a system, that type of stuff. So now all of these come together in a typical workflow that I'm going to talk about here. And this is the typical pen test workflow that a pen tester will use when they're trying to exploit a vulnerability on a system. So the first step would be to scan for vulnerabilities. That would be using code in the auxiliary module. Then you can choose and configure an exploit from the exploit module. Same for a payload, and you can attach the payload to the exploit, and then you can encode your payload, and then you can run your exploit, and Metasploit will handle everything for you. So I just have an example here of, well, a very simple example about an exploitation of a vulnerability. It exploits the eternal blue vulnerability. Basically, on Windows 7 machines, there was a very big vulnerability where, it was very prevalent, and it wasn't really hard to exploit. So, as you can see in this top blurb here, they're using not necessarily Metasploit, but this is something that would also be supported by Metasploit. It's an Nmap port scanner. So they scan the target machine, which is the 10.10.232.162. And you can see it says port 445 TCP. It's open and it's running this Microsoft DS. I believe that stands for drive share, but I could be wrong. So this would give the attacker a hint, okay, maybe this is vulnerable to the eternal blue. So what you would do then is run Metasploit. This is what it would look like in the console. And you would use an auxiliary module and look for a scanner that, I think it skipped a slide actually. Yeah, so you would look for a scanner that would tell you if the target system is likely to be vulnerable to Eternal Blue. So that's an example of an auxiliary module. And then Metasploit, a big benefit of Metasploit is that the code is already there, the snippets of code are already there, and all you need to do is configure set variables that the user is allowed to change. So for example here, they would use that scanner for Eternal Blue, and then they run set R hosts to set the remote hosts that the scanner is supposed to scan, and then they just type in run, and it'll return, okay, the host is likely vulnerable to this. Then they will look for that exploit, the Eternal Blue exploit, and they can see it in Metasploit. Metasploit will return it, and then similarly with the scanner, they would set the options, or they would use the exploit, and then they would set the options. You can see this is what the options look like. Some of them are required, some of them are optional. And then once they've set their options, they can just run the exploit, and it'll basically run automatically. So you might be wondering, okay, you haven't spoken about selecting a payload, and you haven't spoken about encoding in this particular case. So Metasploit, by default, makes the payload okay, the naming is very weird. It's called a metapreter shell or metapreter. It's arguable. This is basically a very stable shell that you can run on the target machine to connect to the attacker's machine, which has a bunch of additional functionality like sysinfo, get UID, hash dump, and webcam stream, and you can see what they do here on the side. Additionally, this is quite a simple example, so you don't necessarily need encoding in this case. This is taken from an article showing a solution for a problem on a website called Try Hack Me, where people learn to pen test basically. So it's not really that complicated. This is still, for learning mainly. So I think from what I've told you today, I hope that you've sort of opened your eyes to pen testing. This is very introductory. It isn't that hard to learn initially. There's services like Try Hack Me, which I invite you to investigate if you're interested in this type of stuff. But it really is an interesting little slice of the computer science world that it may be worth looking into. Thank you.